My husband is sitting alone in our house right now with his 9-year-old affair child, surrounded by empty rooms where my daughter's belongings used to be. 3 days ago, he told me he had been cheating for years and that the other woman had died, leaving him responsible for a child I never knew existed. Yesterday, I moved every single item belonging to my 10-year-old daughter to my parents' house, leaving nothing for his affair child to use or claim. Our home has been transformed from a family residence into a war zone where my husband expected my daughter to share her bedroom, her toys, and her life with the living proof of his betrayal. When he told my daughter she would need to accommodate his affair child indefinitely, I realized that his selfishness and entitlement extended far beyond his infidelity. I called my parents within hours of his announcement and arranged for my daughter to stay in their guest room while I figure out how to protect her from the emotional devastation that her father has brought into our home. My extended family helped me pack every piece of clothing, every toy, every book, and every personal item that belonged to my daughter. We also installed locks on my bedroom and my son's bedroom to prevent the affair child from using spaces that belonged to our legitimate family members. My husband's belongings were moved from our marital bedroom to his home office, making it clear that he is no longer welcome in the bed he has been sharing with me while maintaining a secret family with another woman. When my husband returned home yesterday evening with his affair child, he was shocked to discover that my daughter's room was completely empty and that nothing had been left for the child he expected us to accommodate without question or preparation. He became angry about the missing belongings and accused me of being cruel by not providing adequate clothing and supplies for a child who had recently lost her mother and was already dealing with trauma and displacement. But his anger revealed the depth of his entitlement and his complete failure to understand the consequences of his choices. He had conducted a multi-year affair, created a secret child, and then expected his legitimate family to immediately accept and accommodate the evidence of his betrayal without protest or boundary setting. This morning, he confronted me in the kitchen to complain again about my decision to remove my daughter's belongings before his affair child arrived. He said that I was being unnecessarily vindictive by refusing to share resources with a child who had nowhere else to go and no other family to provide support. I told him that his affair child's needs were his responsibility to meet, not mine or my daughter's. I pointed out that expecting my 10-year-old to sacrifice her bedroom and belongings to accommodate his affair child was unreasonable and cruel to both children involved. The argument that followed revealed that my husband had no realistic plans for managing his affair child or supporting her emotional and practical needs during this transition period. He had simply assumed that his existing family would absorb the impact of his secret life without question or resistance. But let me take you back to Saturday morning when my world collapsed after my husband casually announced that he had been living a double life for years and expected me to help him manage the consequences. Saturday morning started like any other weekend in our household, with my 14-year-old son sleeping late, my 10-year-old daughter watching cartoons, and my husband reading the newspaper over coffee in our kitchen. I was planning a regular day of household tasks, family time, and preparation for the upcoming week. But my husband had been acting strangely for several days, taking mysterious phone calls and seeming distracted during family conversations. I assumed he was dealing with work stress or personal concerns that he would eventually share with me when he felt ready to discuss them. Instead, he sat me down for what he called an important family discussion and proceeded to destroy our marriage and our children's sense of security with information that he had been hiding for years. He told me that he had been having an affair with a woman I had never heard of, and that this affair had resulted in a 9-year-old daughter who was now his responsibility, because the child's mother had died recently under circumstances that he did not fully explain. The revelation that my husband had been maintaining a secret family for nearly a decade while pretending to be a devoted father and husband was devastating enough. But the additional information that he was now bringing this affair child into our home permanently was beyond my ability to process calmly. He explained that he was leaving immediately to collect the child, and that our family would need to make accommodations to welcome her into our household, while he figured out long-term arrangements for her care and support. The most shocking aspect of my husband's announcement was not just the existence of his affair child, but his expectation that our family would immediately accommodate her presence without discussion, preparation, or consideration of the emotional impact on our existing children. He told me that the affair child would be staying in my daughter's bedroom for the foreseeable future, and that my daughter would need to share her space, her belongings, and her privacy with a stranger who represented the destruction of our family's stability and trust. When I expressed shock and concern about this arrangement, my husband dismissed my feelings and said that we needed to focus on practical solutions rather than dwelling on past mistakes that could not be changed or undone. He seemed to believe that his admission of infidelity and secret parenthood should be followed immediately by family cooperation and support for managing the consequences of his choices. He could not understand why I might need time to process this information or why our children might require preparation and support. My 10-year-old daughter was devastated when her father told her that she would be sharing her bedroom with his affair child. She came to me crying and confused about why a stranger would be moving into her private space and why her father had another daughter that she had never heard about. I realized that my husband's approach to this situation was causing additional trauma to our existing children, while expecting them to sacrifice their comfort and security to accommodate his affair child's needs. I called my parents immediately to explain the situation and asked whether my daughter could stay with them temporarily while I figured out how to protect her from the emotional chaos that her father had brought into our home. My parents were shocked by the news of my husband's affair and secret child, but they immediately agreed to provide a safe and stable environment for my daughter during this crisis period. They offered their guest room and assured me that she could stay as long as necessary. I explained to my daughter that staying with her grandparents would allow her to maintain her normal routines and privacy, while the adults figured out how to handle the complicated situation that her father had created. She was relieved to learn that she would not have to share her bedroom with a stranger, and that she could continue sleeping in a familiar, comfortable environment during this confusing and upsetting time. On Monday, my parents, sister, brother-in-law, and nephews came to help us move all of my daughter's belongings to my parents' house. We packed every piece of clothing, every toy, every book, and every personal item that belonged to her. We also helped install locks on my bedroom and my son's bedroom to ensure that the affair child could not access spaces that belonged to our legitimate family members. These locks provided both practical security and symbolic boundaries about what belonged to our family versus what was available to accommodate my husband's affair child. My husband's belongings were moved from our marital bedroom to the fourth bedroom that he had been using as a home office. This change made it clear that he was no longer welcome to share the bed where he had been sleeping while maintaining a secret family with another woman. The process of removing my daughter's belongings and securing the house took most of the day, but it felt like necessary preparation for protecting our family's interests and maintaining boundaries about what we were willing to sacrifice to accommodate my husband's affair child. My son decided to remain at the house because he felt that leaving would abandon his father during a difficult time, but he supported the decision to protect his sister from having to share her space with the affair child. When my husband returned home on Tuesday evening with his affair child, he was shocked to discover that my daughter's room was completely empty and that no provisions had been made for the child he expected us to accommodate without question. The affair child was clearly confused and upset by the empty room and the obvious tension in our household. She had recently lost her mother and was now being brought into a family situation that was hostile and unwelcoming through no fault of her own. My husband became angry about the missing belongings and the empty room, but his anger revealed his complete failure to understand the consequences of his choices and the impact of his expectations on everyone involved. He had conducted a multi-year affair, created a secret child, and then expected his legitimate family to immediately provide accommodation and resources, without protest or boundary setting. He seemed to believe that his confession should be followed by automatic forgiveness and cooperation, rather than natural consequences and protective measures for the family members he had betrayed and deceived. The affair child's presence in our home was a constant reminder of my husband's infidelity and dishonesty. Every interaction with her reinforced the reality that he had been living a double life while pretending to be a devoted family man. But I also recognized that the child was an innocent victim of adult choices and circumstances beyond her control. She had lost her mother and was now being brought into a hostile environment where her presence created conflict and resentment. The situation was complicated by the fact that my husband had no realistic plans for supporting the affair child's emotional and practical needs during this transition period. He seemed to expect that his existing family would automatically absorb the responsibility for her care and well-being. The confrontation that revealed the full extent of my husband's entitlement and poor planning happened Wednesday morning in our kitchen, while his affair child was still sleeping in the empty bedroom that had previously belonged to my daughter. My husband had clearly spent the night thinking about this situation and had decided that my response to his announcement was unreasonable and cruel. He seemed to believe that I should have immediately welcomed his affair child and provided whatever accommodations and resources she needed. He began the conversation by expressing his anger and disappointment about finding my daughter's room completely empty when he had brought his affair child home the previous evening. He said that he had expected basic clothing and supplies to be available for a child who had recently lost her mother and was dealing with trauma and displacement. He pointed out that the affair child had come from a much warmer climate and did not have appropriate clothing for our northern weather conditions. He said that my decision to remove all of my daughter's belongings had left his affair child without adequate winter clothes or other necessities. But his complaint revealed that he had made no advance preparations for bringing his affair child into our home. He had not purchased clothing, toys, or other supplies that would be needed for a 9-year-old child. He had simply assumed that my daughter's belongings would be available for his affair child to use. I told him that his affair child's needs were his responsibility to meet, not mine or my daughter's. I pointed out that expecting my 10-year-old to sacrifice her belongings to accommodate his affair child was unreasonable and unfair to both children involved. I explained that my daughter had done nothing wrong and should not be expected to give up her privacy, her bedroom, or her possessions to accommodate the consequences of his infidelity and poor decision-making. My husband responded by accusing me of being vindictive and cruel toward an innocent child who had no control over the circumstances that had brought her into our family. He said that my actions proved that I cared more about punishing him than about helping a child who needed support and stability. But I pointed out that removing my daughter from a harmful situation was not the same as punishing his affair child. I had acted to protect my own child from emotional trauma, not to hurt his affair child or make her situation more difficult. I explained that forcing my daughter to share her bedroom with the living proof of her father's betrayal would have been psychologically damaging and unfair. Children should not be expected to accommodate adult relationship problems or sacrifice their security for the consequences of parental infidelity. My husband seemed genuinely surprised that I viewed the bedroom sharing arrangement as harmful to my daughter. He said that children were naturally adaptable and that learning to share space and resources would be good for both girls. He suggested that I was being overprotective and dramatic about what he characterized as a normal adjustment period that all blended families experience when new members are added to existing household structures. But his analysis revealed his complete failure to understand the difference between planned family blending and forcing children to accommodate the sudden appearance of affair children who represent parental betrayal and deception. Normal blended families involve honest communication, gradual introductions, and careful consideration of all children's emotional needs. They do not involve surprising existing children with demands that they immediately share their bedrooms with the evidence of parental infidelity. I told my husband that his affair child was not a new family member who deserved welcome and accommodation. She was the consequence of his dishonesty and betrayal, and her presence in our home was a constant reminder of his deception and poor character. I pointed out that I had never consented to raising his affair child or providing resources for her care and support. His decision to conduct an affair and create a secret family was his choice, but the consequences of that choice were his responsibility to manage. My husband became defensive and angry when I characterized his affair child as a consequence rather than a family member. He said that, regardless of the circumstances surrounding her conception and birth, she was still an innocent child who deserved love and support. He argued that his affair child had not chosen to be born or to lose her mother, and that she should not be punished for adult decisions and circumstances beyond her control. But I pointed out that protecting my own children from emotional harm was not the same as punishing his affair child. I had a responsibility to prioritize my daughter's well-being over his affair child's needs, especially when accommodating her would cause psychological damage to my own child. Whoa. I explained that his affair child's tragic circumstances did not create an obligation for our family to sacrifice our own children's security and comfort to accommodate her needs. Her situation was unfortunate, but it was his responsibility to address, rather than expecting his betrayed family to absorb the burden. My husband said that my attitude proved that I was more interested in maintaining anger and resentment than in moving forward constructively to create a stable environment for all the children involved in this situation. He suggested that my focus on protecting my daughter was actually an excuse for refusing to forgive his mistakes and work toward rebuilding our family relationships in a way that could accommodate his affair child's needs. But his analysis ignored the fact that forgiveness and accommodation are not the same thing. I might eventually be able to forgive his infidelity, but that did not mean I was obligated to provide housing, clothing, and emotional support for his affair child. What? I told him that his expectation of immediate accommodation and resource sharing revealed his complete failure to understand the impact of his choices on everyone affected by his deception and betrayal. I pointed out that he had conducted his affair and maintained his secret family for years without considering how the revelation of these relationships would affect his legitimate family members. Now he was expecting us to immediately adjust our lives, our routines, and our living arrangements to accommodate consequences that he had created through choices that we had never been consulted about or agreed to support. I said that his anger about my protective measures for my daughter proved that he still prioritized his own convenience over the emotional well-being of the family members he had betrayed and deceived. My husband responded by saying that dwelling on past mistakes was counterproductive and that we needed to focus on practical solutions for managing the current situation rather than continuing to punish him for choices that could not be changed. He said that his affair child was now part of our reality whether I approved or not, and that refusing to accommodate her needs would not change the circumstances or make the situation disappear. But I pointed out that his affair child's presence in our home was not inevitable or permanent. He had choices about how to manage her care and support that did not require his betrayed family to sacrifice their security and resources. I suggested that he could find alternative housing arrangements, seek support from the affair child's maternal relatives, or explore other options that would not require forcing his legitimate children to accommodate the evidence of his infidelity. My husband said that these alternatives were not realistic or appropriate, and that his affair child needed stability and family support during her grief and adjustment period. He argued that separating her from our family would cause additional trauma and abandonment issues that would harm her long-term emotional development and well-being. But I pointed out that our home was not a stable or supportive environment for his affair child when her presence created conflict, resentment, and trauma for his existing children. I said that forcing hostile family members to provide accommodation and resources would not create the loving, supportive environment that his affair child needed for healthy development. The conversation ended with my husband accusing me of being selfish and vindictive, while I maintained that protecting my own children from emotional harm was my primary responsibility, regardless of his affair child's needs or circumstances. He said that my response to his confession proved that I cared more about maintaining anger than about doing what was best for all the children affected by this situation. But I knew that accommodating his affair child at the expense of my own children's emotional well-being would not be best for anyone involved, including his affair child herself. The 3 days since I moved my daughter's belongings to my parents' house have been characterized by tense standoffs and my husband's growing realization that his expectations for immediate family accommodation were unrealistic and poorly planned. His affair child has been staying in the empty bedroom that previously belonged to my daughter, sleeping on an air mattress and living out of the suitcase she brought from her previous home. The stark emptiness of the room serves as a constant reminder that she is not welcome or accommodated in our household. My husband has been scrambling to purchase basic clothing and supplies for his affair child, but his efforts have been haphazard and inadequate. He clearly had not anticipated the practical challenges of suddenly becoming responsible for a 9-year-old child without advanced planning or preparation. The affair child has been asking questions about why the bedroom is empty and where the previous occupant went. My husband has been giving her vague explanations about temporary arrangements and family adjustments, but she is obviously confused and upset by the hostile environment. My son has been trying to maintain normal routines while navigating the tension and conflict that his father's choices have brought into our home. He supports my decision to protect his sister, but he also feels sympathy for the affair child who is clearly suffering from displacement and rejection. The most painful aspect of this situation has been watching the affair child's confusion and distress about her unwelcoming reception in our home. She is an innocent victim of adult choices and circumstances, but her presence serves as a constant reminder of my husband's betrayal and deception. I have had to remind myself repeatedly that protecting my own children from emotional trauma is my primary responsibility, even when that protection creates additional difficulties for his affair child. My daughter has been thriving in my parents' stable and loving environment, away from the chaos and conflict that her father created with his confession and expectations. She has been able to maintain her normal routines and activities without the stress of accommodating unwanted changes to her living situation. My parents have been incredibly supportive throughout this crisis, providing not only housing for my daughter, but also emotional support and practical assistance with managing the legal and financial implications of my husband's affair and secret family. They have helped me contact lawyers to understand my rights and options regarding divorce proceedings, child custody arrangements, and financial responsibilities for my husband's affair child. The legal consultation revealed that I have no obligation to provide housing, financial support, or emotional care for my husband's affair child. His affair child's needs are his responsibility to meet, not mine or my existing children's. However, the lawyers also explained that divorce proceedings could be complicated by the presence of his affair child and questions about his ability to provide adequate care and support for multiple children with limited resources. My husband's financial situation will be severely strained by his new responsibility for his affair child's care, support, and emotional needs. This will likely affect his ability to provide adequate child support for our existing children during divorce proceedings. I have been documenting his poor planning and inadequate preparation for bringing his affair child into our home as evidence of his irresponsible decision-making and lack of consideration for existing family members. His expectation that our family would immediately accommodate his affair child without discussion, preparation, or resource allocation demonstrates his selfishness and entitlement regarding the consequences of his infidelity. The empty bedroom and missing belongings serve as visible evidence that his betrayed family is not willing to sacrifice their security and resources to accommodate consequences that he created through his own choices. My husband has been trying to convince me that my protective measures are unnecessarily harsh and that some level of accommodation would be appropriate given his affair child's tragic circumstances and need for stability. But I have maintained that my primary responsibility is protecting my own children from emotional harm, not managing the consequences of his poor choices or providing support for his affair child's needs. The affair child's presence in our home creates ongoing trauma and instability for my existing children, who should not be expected to sacrifice their security to accommodate evidence of their father's betrayal. I have been exploring long-term housing options that would allow me to provide a stable, conflict-free environment for my children while my husband figures out how to manage his affair child's care and support independently. The most likely outcome is that my children and I will establish a separate household while my husband learns to provide adequate care for his affair child without expecting assistance or accommodation from the family he betrayed. This separation will allow my children to heal from the trauma of their father's confession and betrayal without the ongoing stress of living with constant reminders of his infidelity and poor judgment. It will also require my husband to take full responsibility for his affair child's emotional and practical needs without relying on his betrayed family to provide resources or support that he failed to plan for adequately. The experience has taught me that protecting my children from the consequences of their father's choices is more important than maintaining family unity or accommodating his expectations for immediate forgiveness and cooperation. His affair child's needs, while legitimate and important, are not my responsibility to address when meeting those needs would cause emotional harm to my own children. I have learned that setting boundaries about what I am willing to sacrifice to accommodate consequences of betrayal is necessary for protecting my children's well-being and maintaining my own emotional stability. My husband's anger about my protective measures reveals his continued expectation that his betrayed family should absorb the impact of his choices without protest or boundary setting. But his expectations are unrealistic and unfair to everyone involved, including his affair child, who deserves a genuinely welcoming environment rather than forced accommodation from hostile family members. The most important lesson from this experience has been understanding that forgiveness does not require accommodation, and that protecting my children from emotional harm is more important than managing other people's expectations or needs. My husband created this situation through his own choices, and the consequences belong to him to manage rather than expecting his betrayed family to sacrifice their security and well-being to accommodate his affair child. I hope that he will eventually develop realistic plans for providing adequate care and support for his affair child, without expecting assistance from family members who are focused on healing from his betrayal and protecting their own children from additional trauma. Have you ever had to protect your children from the consequences of your partner's choices? How do you handle situations where accommodating one person's needs would cause harm to your own family members? What advice would you give to someone whose partner expects immediate accommodation for consequences of betrayal and infidelity? Share your experiences with protecting children during family crises in the comments below.